Welcome to the Dusty Jobs podcast from Imperial Systems. Industry knowledge to make your job easier and safer.
Thanks for joining us again here on the Imperial Podcast. We're still at Imperial headquarters here in Mercer, PA. Joining us today is Bob with DEKRA. Bob, tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about DEKRA.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today. My name is Bob Korn. I'm the Business Development Director for DEKRA Process Safety. We are a process safety consultancy, and we help our clients prevent accidents, whether they be with combustible dust, flammable liquids, and or chemical reactions. We basically do that through providing consulting services, testing services, and training services.
Yeah, how long have you been? You've been in the industry for what?
Been in the industry a long time. About 20 years in industrial protection and in process safety for approximately the last 4 years. Yeah. But industrial protection over 20 years.
Yeah, DEKRA's been around for a while too, right?
DEKRA has. We were formerly known as Chilworth Technology. A lot of people in the U.S. may recognize that name, but we became part of the DEKRA family about 8 years ago. And we've been in business for over 30 years, providing process safety support for our clients in the U.S. And globally.
There you go. So the main reason we had you come in today was because there's some new standards coming out around DHA. And
there are.
Yeah, and mostly it's what's that code? What's the new standard?
Nfpa 652, actually it's not quite new, but it was first released in 2015, the first edition, and 652 is the standard on the fundamentals of combustible dust. And it is now the overarching standard that Nfpa has developed and put out there to really help people have more continuity in understanding the hazards of combustible dust.
Yeah, and they wrote it in 2015, right? But now it's actually being implemented in 2020, right?
Well, there's a deadline. One of the elements to be compliant with NFPA 652, you need to complete a dust hazard analysis. It's really one of the three primary elements with regard to combustible dust. And there is a deadline now that has been established for September of 2020 to be compliant and complete your dust hazard analysis.
Yeah, but they're going to bump that back again, don't you think? Do you think they're going to bump it back again?
Well, they did, as you said, they bumped it once. In the initial due date was September of 2018, and they got some pushback from industry, and so they pushed it out to 2020. Yeah. I don't know if they'll push it again. They may or may not. The important thing is for people to know that the standard's out there, and they need to complete a dust hazard analysis.
From what we're hearing, it doesn't sound like it's really. I was kind of saying that sarcastically. I don't think it's going to get pushed back, but even if it does, it's important to get it done no matter what, to know what your safety is like in your facility. I mean, and that's what you guys do, right?
Absolutely. It's important to complete. The combustible dust hazards have been around for a long time. The first combustible dust accident was documented, I believe, in 1782 in a bakery in Italy. They had a flour dust explosion. A gentleman was in there with a candlelit lamp and collecting flour. But dust explosions have been with us for a long time. Yeah. NFPA has done a great job with releasing 652, and there's several other standards that all point to the hazards or help identify specific industries with the hazards of combustible dust. But NFPA 652 is attempting to combine those into one. Well, it's not combining them now, but they have one overarching standard. Oh, yeah. That basically helps focus people's activities so they know what to do to be compliant and to be safe when they handle combustible dust.
So the first step in figuring out what you need is a dust hazard analysis, right?
It's one of the steps. There's three components, as I mentioned, of being compliant with 652. The first step is really understanding, do you have a combustible dust? And there's a couple ways you can go about that. There's industry data that's out there that if that's appropriate and descriptive of your process, that can be used.
There's some notes out there already on some dust.
There is some industry, and it might be company literature that they already have, or some research or development or testing they did previously, so they may have some data. Okay. Otherwise, there's many laboratories. DEKRA Process Safety has a certified or ISO accredited laboratories that provides combustible dust testing. But in having good data, solid data to do the assessment is one of the key elements of.
So getting your dust tested.
Get your dust tested. Find the appropriate material properties that fully characterize the hazards of that particular material. That's the first step, really, in performing a dust hazard analysis.
Uh-huh.
From there, you perform the actual dust hazard analysis, which is similar to a process hazard analysis, which some people may be familiar with. It was developed by the chemical processing industry many years ago. OSHA has a PSM standard, which is they've applied to many regulated industries. But the difference being with a dust hazard analysis is just focuses on a single hazard, and that is simply combustible dust.
Okay.
The dust hazard analysis basically is you understand the material properties, and then you walk through a facility looking at each of the unit operations and that where they either handle or they handle combustible powders, or they create a combustible dust through a particle reduction or some other process.
Particle reduction, you mean like grinding or anything like that? In the facility where they're generating dust, you want to look at that. So step one is getting that dust tested. Step two is actually walking through the facility and seeing where this dust is coming from and how it's being produced. Am I getting this correct?
You are.
All right.
Yeah,
Okay.
Good job.
So now we got step three, right?
Well, and not only do we look at the processes of when we're going through the facility, but we're also looking at the facility itself, because we want to understand, what type of housekeeping they have in place, and we look for fugitive dust accumulations. And oftentimes you get dust layers or dust accumulating on horizontal surfaces, whether it be at ground level or elevated surfaces, and that's very important to understand, at what level or how much dust is accumulating within the facility. And those can present special unique hazards and can also contribute to a secondary explosion if you have an initial event.
Gotcha.
Those fugitive accumulations can cause serious consequences if they're not dealt with and cleaned up.
So as you're walking through this facility, you're not just looking at the process that's creating the dust, the source of the dust, but you're also looking at the area around the facility where this dust might be laying on some ductwork or on a shelf, because heaven forbid, if something would happen, that dust is going to get airborne and create a secondary explosion.
Absolutely. Yep, that's absolutely correct. And it's not just the individual processes, although those are, primary, focus of the dust hazard analysis is looking at the individual unit operations where they're grinding, as you mentioned, grinding, milling, sanding, all of those, drying. But you also want to look at the environment in general and the housekeeping program in place and any fugitive accumulations that could be, whether at a floor level or at an elevated level.
Okay. Now, is there that's the full walkthrough? Is there something else you do after that?
Basically, initially you sit down with your client and you review the documents. You get a set of documents that basically plant layout diagram, P&IDs if that's relevant to the process, if it's actually connected process flows, or other flow diagrams, material property data. You review all the documentation ahead of time. Maybe sit down with the client and review that when you get on site. Then you walk down the facility and review the operations. Document your observations and clearly so you can clearly report those back in the report. Do the analysis after you do the walkthrough of the facility and inspect and observe all the different operations and the housekeeping and the fugitive accumulations, and then you compile this all into a report. The dust hazard analysis report includes, of course, your observations, a little bit of description of the process, but it also has the findings and recommendations. So based upon what we've seen, the consultant will make recommendations on what particular changes need to be made based upon what they find or what they look for as gaps.
Gotcha.
And gaps there's certain protection measures that should be in place, and what we do is identify gaps in the existing measures and make recommendations to close those gaps so the facility can be operated safely.
So if I'm let's say I'm a plant manager, I know this is coming up. What are some things I should be doing to prepare for myself as a plant manager getting a dust hazard analysis? What are the steps I need to take? Obviously, we said get your dust tested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, getting the dust tested, and we can help guide our client through that. In some cases, they have a lot of different types of materials that may be used in recipes, if you will, for different products. So maybe we'll help them and advise them to look at, you've got 40 ingredients, but there's 7 product groups that those ingredients go into. So let's test each one of those 7 product groups, the primary ingredients in those 7 product groups. Get the data that we need to do the assessment or the analysis ahead of time. Review the documentation from the site. So they'll be required to pull some of that together. And then we'll also want to have specific team members, depending upon the organization and how they're structured. But you typically, have a EHS person, one of their safety people. You want an operations person, someone that's very familiar with each of the unit operations that you're going to be looking at. Maintenance people are very useful in the dust hazard analysis. They're the people that really know the ins and outs of the facility.
The guys who got to back it up, right? They know where it's coming from.
The guys that got to fix the broken stuff. And when you're looking at, say, for instance, a bucket elevator, we need to know, they've got belt alignment gauges or sensors that, tell them when that belt is out of alignment. Critical things that they need to keep on top of to ensure that you don't introduce mechanical friction or sparks or ignition sources. An
ignition source.
One of the key elements when you're talking about dust hazard analysis, and there's 4 primary things that you're looking at when you're doing a dust hazard assessment, and that is, is the dust combustible? Is the dust small enough to be
particle size?
Is the particle size small enough to propagate, to promote the deflagration event? Can the material be lofted in the air? Is there some mechanism that it could be lofted in the air, dispersed in the air? Can that dispersed cloud reach the minimum explosive concentration? Is there enough of it?
Yeah.
And the final element, is there a credible ignition source? So that's why we look at equipment. Equipment can be one source, mechanical, friction or sparks. There's also thermal conditions with the hot bearings and so forth, electrostatic conditions, hot work. There's a myriad of ignition sources out there. And as someone, I'm not sure who said, but ignition sources are free.
They're free.
There's no extra
Someone's
charge
always
for those.
looking to light this stuff on fire. Huh?
Yeah, well, that's what you have to plan for, is that it, can potentially happen at any time. The upset conditions are a reality, and when we're doing dust hazard analysis, not only do we look at the standard operating conditions, but we also consider what can happen in upset conditions.
Yeah.
What happens if this belt turns off, or this pulley gets stuck, or this sensor doesn't work? And what are the potential risks associated with that?
Yeah. So, trying to think of some other things that we could cover here. Utilize most of your knowledge. So we got what's involved. I was kind of looking at our notes here. So once a customer comes to you, you do the walkthrough, you do all of your analysis,
the dust hazard analysis,
right? So the idea is to come back with them with the risks and solutions. Correct? Is that what you do? Or?
Well, after we perform the on-site survey, if you will, or the on-site portion of the analysis, the consultant will take that information and do the assessment or the analysis of all the information collected while on site. They'll prepare a report that is certainly documents their observations and their findings, and identifies the gaps in the safety measures that are existing, or they're or just missing completely, and then make recommendations to close those gaps. And those gaps those recommendations will be risk ranked from high, medium to low. In some cases, we'll see situations at a facility, it's a very high-risk situation, and we'll make the recommendation immediately while on site you need to stop doing that.
Gotcha. So you might be somewhere, you see something going on, you're like, just Turn it off right now.
It's very dangerous. Deal with it right now.
Yep.
And then the other risk ranking is there for as you return the report to the client and they're reviewing what they need to do. Obviously, we all have limited amount of resources and capital to do things. So the risk ranking helps them identify which ones are most important, the ones they need to address in the short term, and apply their funds or their resources to correct.
Everybody's got a budget these days.
Yes, they do.
And then you got to figure out how much you can tackle at once.
Absolutely. It's it's one bite at a time. As far as some of these projects can be very large and very extensive in some of these large facilities, and there's a lot of findings, and they really need that risk ranking to determine what do they attack first.
Yeah, it kind of helps you helps your customers get a strategy to move forward. Maybe it seems overwhelming at first, but you guys can help whittle it down to just what needs tackled, primary issues, and then secondary issues that are coming up down the line. They can budget for those and figure it out as time comes on and as the money comes on to be able to do that.
Correct. And that's, the dust hazard analysis is the second, portion of 652, the second element that you need to perform to be compliant. The third element is to ensure that after the dust hazard analysis or part of the dust hazard analysis, we'll often look at their process safety management program while we're on site and ensure that they have the appropriate elements within their safety management program to handle combustible that address combustible dust issues.
Yeah.
And the client needs to ensure that they have that in there. And sometimes we'll provide a service where we'll audit their program. In some cases, they don't have a program, and we'll develop a program for them. So that's basically the third component. And part of that, I think the important part of the safety management program is another service that we provide on a regular basis is ensure that the personnel within the facility that are in close proximity or work with combustible dust have some training or some knowledge, some basic knowledge of the hazards around dust.
Yeah.
So training is very important.
So do you guys offer that training too? Or
we do.
Yeah. So that'd be something if there was classes or something that if that customer was undereducated in a certain field, you could help bring them up to where they needed to be?
Dependent upon the client need, we offer either on-site training from very simple 1-hour overviews to webinar training. If they've got multiple sites and multiple time zones, we can do webinar training, or we can do more intensive boot camp type training where we do 1, 2, or 3 day training on site with 10, 20 individuals, and we can do. We also include workshops in those trainings that we can tailor to similar operations that client might have on their site.
So once you complete all three of those steps, that would bring you into what is considered compliant then with
correct with 652
with the 652.
And one element that I forgot to mention is 652 is kind of the overarching standard, but there are commodity specific standards for.
Okay.
There's NFPA 661, which is the agricultural food standard. There's 484, the metal standard. There's 664, the wood standard, and so forth. Well, those are commodity specific standards, and those give guidance for these very specific industries, if you will. And if you don't fall into those commodity specific standards, there's a guideline in 654, which is kind of your standard guideline for protection and so forth.
This is a lot of numbers and a lot of information. I am glad there are people out there that are thinking about this full time.
Yeah, and there is, but the good news is that these standards used to have significant inconsistencies from standard to standard, and NFPA has done a good job recently of really pushing the committees to remove some of these inconsistencies, because at the end of the day, the plant owner it's a little bit it's a large task to read these documents and understand them. That's why there's experts like us that can help and assist there, but it's even easier for us as there's less contradictions from standard to standard.
Oh yeah, I can imagine, and then it could get overwhelming real quick.
Very quickly, yeah. And
so, well, I think we covered a lot about what a DHA is and what you need for it. Mm-hmm. Trying to think if there's any other common questions out there that people come to you with that we might be able to cover, help out. Anything you guys get on a regular basis, because with this coming up, we want to make sure that we're able to help people get what they need.
Yeah, probably one of the more common questions is, how long is this going to take? And it depends on the size of the facility and the number of operations that we have to look at.
Yeah.
But for most facilities, we can do the walkthrough of the site in 1 to 3 days. A 3-day on-site visit is a pretty large facility typically. And then the report is generated usually within 30 days after the on-site visit. And we issue a draft report to the client. The client can review that. And they may have questions or comments about the draft report, and then the draft report is then finalized. It's just kind of how the process goes.
So you're looking at, for standard size facility, about a month and a half process?
Yeah, by the time you gather information and get on site and do the assessment and then do the analysis and then get the report done, 2 months would be a pretty quick project.
If it takes about 2 months and the deadline's in September, it's going to be...
There'll be a lot of people scrambling this year to get things done. But, there's no, even though there's a deadline, there's... the authorities having jurisdiction that will come in and say, get this done. There's different ones out there.
Right.
So there's the important thing is you've got to, if you think you have a combustible dust hazard, be doing something about it now. If you don't get it done, have a plan in place.
Yeah.
Certainly, if an AHJ comes into your facility and asks the question, and if you don't have a plan, you're going to be in a less favorable position than if you do have a plan.
Yep. So, thanks for taking some time to share with us. Thanks for giving us some knowledge, some information that's going to hopefully help everybody out there who's trying to figure out a little bit more of what they have to get done with this DHA and with the new standards that are going on, that they can find a little information in this. If you need more information, they can look you guys up. Yep. What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Just look at DEKRA Process Safety.com, and you'll find us out there. If you Google us, Google combustible dust or process safety or DEKRA Process Safety, you'll find us, and we'll be glad to help. There you
go. Once again, if you guys can't find them, feel free to contact us. We'll be glad to point you their way. And thanks for listening to the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to the Dusty Jobs podcast. Breathe better, work safer.